Hi, folks. As you're getting in, we're just going to wait a little bit to admit more folks. So nice, just get comfy. Um, Thank you all for being here. So excited for this talk today. And yeah, I was just telling Sage that we've had probably a record amount of people register for this talk, at least since I've been at Blue Sky. So it's really great to have so many people here today.
Including we could put together a pretty good all-star photography team from the people I see names I see here.
And just so folks know, we are recording this event. And so if you have to pop out or you want to send it to somebody that you know, share it. We'll have this recording on the Blue Sky YouTube channel probably midweek next week. So just keep an eye out on our website, on our socials for that link to our YouTube, and you can rewatch. And yeah, I'll just do a quick introduction of myself, and then I'm going to introduce Sage and Chris. So my name is C. Meyer. I'm the exhibitions director here at Blue Sky in Portland, Oregon. And yeah, I'm super excited to host this noontime Portland time talk. Well, hopefully people are eating some lunch, hanging out. So Sage has her show currently up at Blue Sky. It opened on February 1st and it closes on March 2nd, passing time. If you haven't been by, if you're local, you should definitely check it out. And you can also pick up Sage's new book of the same project here. Okay, I'm just going to give a quick intro in case you don't know much about Sage. But so Sage Sohier has received fellowships from the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, the No Strings Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Massachusetts Artists Foundation. She has published 8 monographs, including Passing Time, this one, among many others. He has had solo shows at Foley Gallery in New York, Robert Klein Gallery in Boston, Carroll and Sons Gallery in Boston, Joseph Bellows Gallery in San Diego, the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago, and Blue Sky here in Portland a few times, I believe. Her work has been included in the group shows at the Museum of Modern Art New York, Fotografiska in Stockholm, the International Center of Photography, the Art Institution of Chicago, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and many other venues. Sohier's work is in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, Cleveland Museum of Art, the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, Portland Art Museum, David Museum, Wellesley College, and the Brooklyn Museum, to name a few. She has taught photography at Harvard University, Wellesley College, and the Massachusetts College of Art, and has done commission work for the George Gundin Foundation in Cleveland, the Robert Rauschenberg Residency Program in Captiva, Florida, and the Photographic Resource Center in Boston, as well as editorial work for numerous publications. She is represented by Robert Klein Gallery in Boston and Joseph Bellows Gallery in California. And we are so pleased to host another Sage Sohier show here at Blue Sky. And this is just a view of our current installation of the show here. So yeah, it's a beautiful show. And if you're able to come, again, the show closes on March 2nd. So you still have some time to come by Blue Sky and check it out. We're open Wednesday to Saturday, noon to 5. And yeah, and then I'm just going to quickly introduce Chris. Chris, I believe you don't you don't really need many introductions. I feel a lot of folks know you, but if you don't know Chris Rauschenberg is one of 5 founders here at Blue Sky Gallery that was started in 1975. We're about to hit our 50th anniversary, which is fantastic and amazing. So stay tuned for information about what we're going to be doing for that celebration. And Chris is a photographer himself and just a cheerleader for many, many photographers over the years. And one of those, it was Sage. So Chris, I was going to just start the conversation between you guys. If you can talk about how you first discovered Sage and how, like, when was that? And just the trajectory of how having Sage's work at Blue Sky.
Yeah, I haven't actually checked this out. Sage has shown this is her sixth show at Blue Sky, and I believe that's the most of anybody, which is appropriate because Sage is one of the best photographers in the world. So we're not going out on a limb there. That's pretty safe. Um, I believe we first showed you just because you sent us a portfolio. I don't think we discovered you anywhere else. Sage, do you remember?
I think I think other photographers who had shown at Blue Sky said, "Oh, you should send work to Blue Sky because they do these great shows and you don't have to be well known." And so I sent you, yeah, which
Yeah.
is true. It's my favorite nonprofit. So
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because this show is work that you did in the 80s and then went back and found more work. And we actually showed it in the 80s. So we were kind of there when the work was, some of it anyway, was pretty fresh. That original show covered like 7 years work or something, I think. So, but it was in its childhood still, that work.
yes, it was.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm very interested to talk to you about the work. I think your work is so powerful, not only because of your visual sense of how to put together a complicated, beautiful picture, but also the your ability to make on short notice a real sort of personal connection with your subjects. And I think both of those traits are really in clear evidence in this body of work. And I'm interested to talk to you kind of more about that. Did you want to start off by showing some images or?
Yes, why don't I do the slideshow? And Chris, why don't you jump in if I forget to talk about something that you think
Okay,
would be
fair enough.
interesting, please jump in and let's just see. You gotta see. Sorry, I'm not very good at this, but I will find it. Here it is. Okay, can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to start with showing pictures from the first book that I did with Nazreli Press, which was published in 2016, called American Scene. And these were pictures from the same time period, from 1979 through 1985. But they were pictures that I had exhibition printed back in the 80s that I had, thought, oh, I really like this picture. I'm going to make an exhibition print of it. And I had done that at the time. When it came to doing the Passing Time book, that was a pandemic project where I went back through my archive of work prints and contact sheets and negatives and ended up printing a bunch of things that I had never printed before. And so I'm going to start with just showing you what I had printed, which was in the book American Scene. And these were all done with a Fujica 6x9 centimeter camera and 120 film, medium format film, and a wide angle lens, the equivalent of a 28mm lens. And it was handheld camera with flash on camera. So I used a lot of fill and flash in many of these pictures. So this is in Chelsea, Massachusetts, two young men with homing pigeons. This was actually taken for a survey project. I was one of the photographers on a survey project of the Fort Point Channel area and the Leather District in Boston. And I was walking around in that new parking lot that you see out the window, and I saw this head sticking out a window and this pigeon right next to the head. And I thought, oh my God, I have to get that. So I yelled up to the guy and said, can I come up and take some pictures? And he said, sure, come on up. And it was an artist building. And he was a musician. After talking to him and the people he was playing with for a while, playing music with, I said, I really like to recreate that of you leaning out the window. And so the pigeon was still hanging out there. For some reason, that pigeon, I guess he must have been feeding it. But anyway, so this was, it's unusual when you ask permission. Often, everything changes and you don't get what you initially saw. You get something else, hopefully. But in this case, it was like I couldn't have predicted what was inside the record albums and stuff, but it was in my imagination of, you know, this sort of voluptuous torso going out the window and this pigeon. That part of it was recreated.
And
And
the
this,
eye and the speaker are great together too, as a pair of eye shapes.
yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah, those are, you know, the great thing about photography is the element of luck involved, and, you know, just these wonderful things that the world provides. So this is in South Boston. You know, most days if I was in Boston and not on a road trip, I would just pick a neighborhood to go to, and I would drive around and walk around and run up to people who looked interesting. And I love these teenagers weightlifting. So one of the things that interested me in going back to this work and doing another book of it, the new book, Passing Time, was that, you know, it struck me that it's such a different era. You know, here are these girls hanging out, and, you know, instead of phones, they have cigarettes, you know, so it's like pre-digital. It's, you know, there's very little air conditioning. People go outside to hang out and to hope something fun will come along for them to do. And I was thinking, you know, I mean, when I grew up in the 50s and 60s, I would run up next door to my neighbors and we'd think of things to do outside. And things had already changed a lot since Helen Levitt was photographing in the late 30s in New York. You know, there was less happening on the street when I grew up, and there was even less in the 80s, but it was still happening. And I think, you know, when you go out and photograph today, it's a very different scene. And you can still find people in parks and, you know, picnicking, and you still find people outside, but they're less hanging out in front of their houses or in neighborhoods. There's less of that. So the world has changed a lot in that sense. This is in East Cambridge, a grandfather and grandson. And this is in Cambridge, teenagers on the sidewalk. And one of the things that I think I got interested in, because I always ask permission, you know, the pictures, I was kind of interested in this hybrid approach of the pictures look natural. I mean, these teenagers on the left all look like they're going about their business, interacting with each other. But the girl on the right is looking at me. And so she's including me as a character in the picture. And that started really interesting me, is like, you know, how do you have that natural look? It's not a candid picture, but it's kind of a natural looking picture. How do you include that? But also there's this awareness of including the photographer in the photograph, or the awareness of the photographer in the photograph.
So you had asked permission there, and she's, as you say, that person on the right is really kind of posing for the picture and paying attention to you. The others are just going about their business. Do you think they're aware they're in the picture, or do you think that they think that you're just taking a picture of the person on the right?
No, I think they were definitely aware, because I asked all of them. Of course, with a wide angle lens, you don't really know what people think, and they don't really know exactly what you're including in the frame. But I think they did know. I mean, it's possible that the couple over on the left didn't know that they were included, but I think other people did. And I think, I don't know, it's interesting now when I try to photograph people outside. It's different. I mean, in some ways it's easier. You know, you can show someone your website, you can give them a card, they can make sure that you're legitimate. So in that sense, it's easier to sort of, you know, they know that you're not some kind of creep, you know, when you ask. But at the same time, they're going to start giving you their selfie smiles. There's going to be more of a self-consciousness. And back then, you know, people really didn't know why you were taking pictures. They would often ask me, and I would say, I try to have shows in art galleries, and, you know, if the picture might end up in a book of portraits someday. And they would look at me like, you know, are you crazy or something? You know, this was not on people's radar back then.
Yeah.
as it is now, where there's, you know, the idea that, you know, instant fame can happen to you if, you know, something is posted. So that would, it was good in the sense that you could, it was easier to catch something natural. But it was also harder to make people understand what you were actually doing and that it was legitimate. So I would say it sort of cuts both ways.
Yeah.
This was a trip I took to Utah. So I would take road trips in the summer, and in the winter, I'd go down to inland Florida or the Panhandle or someplace warm. And this was a Mormon family in Utah. And this was in Framingham, Massachusetts, a family picnicking, an extended family, I should say. And this was a trip I took. I went to a friend's wedding in St. Louis, and I thought, you know, I should take a few days to, I've never photographed in the Midwest before. I should drive around. So I drove around through Indiana and Illinois and Kentucky, and I was really, it was really hard to deal with the flatness. I hadn't ever been confronted, you know, especially with the wide angle lens. I kept thinking, you know, Sage, you idiot, you should have brought a longer lens with you. You know, this is like very difficult. But I like it in this picture. I think it kind of works in this picture. And I also love the fact that the girl's lying on the concrete rather than the grass. And, you know, you end up thinking about that choice. Was it because her father was mowing the lawn, or was she creeped out about bugs, or, you know, why is she there?
Right. Could have been chiggers they were worried about.
Chiggers. Yeah, that's true. I'd be worried about chiggers too, having been bitten by them a few times.
No, I think the fact that you're using wide angle lens, I think is really good, because that means that you are physically standing closer to your subjects than if you were using a longer lens, which puts us as the viewer closer to them as well. So I think I think you were smart to not bring a more telephoto lens. I think the wide angle is just right.
Yeah. Well, in general, I liked it. It was a little harder in this kind of very flat environment, because it was harder to make the background work, I guess. So this was a trip I took to West Virginia in 1982. I grew up in Virginia, and so I had gone down to visit my mother, and then I proceeded down into West Virginia from there. And this is in Fall River, Massachusetts, one of the industrial mill towns that I like to photograph in. And here you can see the effect of the flash, you know, filling in the foreground, the little girls in the foreground. And it allows you not to blow out the background. You know, you could still see the detail in the sky.
Let me just say also that when you're talking about you know, in the flat background in the Midwest, it was hard to make the image work. That I like to think about a picture in terms of, like, if you think of a song that has lyrics and music, and that thinking a photograph, that there's the subject matter of the picture, but then there's also kind of the visual music of it. And I think what you were talking about with the flatness in the Midwest is, if you look at this picture, and there's the clothesline clothes, and I mean, there's something in every part of the picture that's
Right.
satisfying to look at, and the sort of visual music of how the forms are gathered within the rectangle is very beautiful. And same true on the one before, you know, where you had that sort of deep space on the left, and it really it makes the lyrics, the content, much richer to have that visual joy and that we get in looking at them.
Yeah, I think that's true. You'd have this layering effect where you're not just relying on the people in the foreground to be interesting. It's sort of the whole thing. You get a better sense of the environment too. This was in inland Florida, a place called Immokalee, near Central Florida, near Lake Okeechobee. And I saw this older man, and he kept moving his chair out of the shade. You know, as the shade inched forward, he would move into the sun. And this is in West Virginia. And I started to really like one of the things that the wide angle lens did. It really calls attention to scale, and how that toy truck looks almost the same size in the frame as that real life trailer in the background. And I really like that about wide angle. So now we're moving on to passing time. And so this was, you know, during the pandemic, I didn't really feel I could go out and photograph people. I didn't want to get close to people, and I was sure that people didn't want me getting close to them. So I thought, well, you know, it'd be really interesting to go back and see if did I miss anything, you know, back front in these negatives. I had kept some of my work prints. I hadn't kept all of my work prints, which made it a little harder. But I went back through all my contact sheets, and I kept finding things that I hadn't even printed. I mean, some things I found, you know, I liked the work print, but I'd never exhibition printed it. But a lot of them I hadn't even printed, and I was trying to figure out why. And you know, I think that when you print something and you've just photographed it, often what you remember is what you're struck by what you didn't get rather than what you did get. And so there's often a disappointment because you had such hopes while you were taking the picture. And you know, when I look at the contact sheets now, 40 years later, what I see what I did get. I don't remember, you know, the shot I thought I had, you know, gotten, which was better, even better, you know. And it's I think that's part of it. And the other part of it is I think I'm more interested now in just in the people. I don't think I'm quite as much of a perfectionist about you know, packing the frame. I mean, the frames are still, you know, there's still a lot going on, but I think that's less of a requirement for me now, perhaps. So this one is from Pittsburgh.
Speaking of a packed frame.
That's a packed frame, yep. And this was from that survey project again on the Fort Point Channel area. This was a family that lived on a houseboat in the Fort Point Channel.
The flag and the mop. I mean, this is just so great with the bikes and the barge. I mean, you could just keep your eyes moving around on this picture, finding more and more delightful stuff for quite a while.
This is in Pittsburgh. And again, I'm really interested in the girls on the right who are interacting with me. And yet the rest of the frame, you know, really seems like just a street scene that's very kind of natural. So again, it's like this sort of strange hybrid of a candid, but almost candid street scene and something that's different, that's more interactive and more collaborative.
So let me ask you a question, which is when you ask permission,
Mm-hmm.
and then that sort of starts a clock going. How long is it generally that you're photographing them between when you ask permission and when you stop photographing them?
I think it really varies. I mean, when I'm photographing people outside, I don't stay too long. It's different if I get permission to go to someone's house and photograph
Right.
them, and then, you
Right.
know, I feel like they've said yes and I can stay for a while. But with this, I only got 8 shots on a roll because of the 6x9 wide format. And so I had to be, you know, careful I didn't want to be changing film all the time and missing shots in the middle. So I had to be a little careful how I shot. So I would say usually I would take, in most of these cases, I would take 3 or 4 pictures, you know, but sometimes only 1 or 2, but sometimes. So it would vary between staying with people for, you know, a couple of minutes to staying with them for maybe 20 minutes, something like that. And,
Right.
you know, the larger the group, the more you can kind of fade into the wall and be a fly on the wall. So if you're only photographing 1 or 2 people, they're more self-conscious. So you have to be more careful how long you stay, I guess. And this is in South Boston. I ran into this boy who was playing with his dog, and the dog was, you know, chomping at the hose water. And I just love the shadow of the dog and the shadow of the building and the arc of the hose. This was in Newburgh, New York, on the way to out to Pennsylvania one summer, and I found lots of families hanging out there. And this is in Pittsburgh after church on a Sunday, and you can see how the flash, fills in. I mean, the flash is really. It helped me. I was at. It's not like working with a digital camera where you can just change the ISO to 1600. I was at 200 ASA, and I didn't want to put the camera on a tripod. And so the flash really helped me be able to shoot at a 60th or a 30th of a second and still be able to handhold the camera. And this is Old Orchard Beach in Maine. I just couldn't resist that dog with its fuzzy feet and how the hair of the girl blends in with the hair of the dog there. Hampton Beach, New Hampshire was a great place to photograph. At lots of little inexpensive cottages where people would hang out. I think it's become quite gentrified by now, but I'm not sure. I haven't been there for a while.
Yeah, clearly it's not gentrified yet if you look at the time you took this picture, but yes, I love the sort of the emptied out pockets and the sort of clothespin bag and the birdhouse. I mean, there's such, like I say, such a visual music, and then the clothespins itself and the lines up above, and again, it's just there's such a sensual pleasure for me in looking at this picture, and then also it goes with what I feel is his pleasure in just lying and relaxing out in this yard full of sort of dilapidatedness, but it's completely cozy to him.
Yeah, definitely. This was in East Boston. I was driving around and I saw this young man in his above ground pool, and I went up to this little gate and said, could I come in and take some pictures of you and floating in the pool? And he said yes. And I guess, I ended up really liking seeing what was across the way, this sort of industrial wasteland across the river there. And it's such a strange picture because it's so tranquil and, summer, the pleasures of summer. And yet right across the way is this industrial landscape, which doesn't look so wonderful.
Yeah, I will mention that Scott Brownell asked, how much do you notice the backgrounds when you're photographing? And so you just answered that question, that was something that you were very much paying attention to.
Very much, very much. I would say that the reason I would stop to photograph in certain neighborhoods was because of the landscape, was because of the neighborhood and how it looked. And then that would motivate me. If it was a really interesting landscape, that would motivate me to find people to photograph within it. And if it wasn't an interesting landscape, I was much less motivated. This is in Dania, Florida. And teenagers lifting weights. I love that bird bath in the front. You kind of don't expect it there. It sort of seems like out of context in a nice way.
And it's great the way she has her foot up on it. I mean, it's such a fantastic combination, such an interaction between the person and the bird bath.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
And then of course the person right in the center and this beautiful gesture and holding the weights. I mean, just there's so much there.
This was in Lawrence, Massachusetts, one of the mill towns that I like to photograph in. And I saw this couple coming across the tracks, and I love that brick mill building in the background and the smokestacks and the American food sign in the background and the tracks themselves. And of course, I love the couple's plaid pants too. They're kind of matching plaid pants.
Right. Happily, nobody wears those pants anymore, Although there was a while where you could find a lot of them at Goodwill.
Yeah, you could. There were, yeah, they had a resurgence, unfortunately. This is in Perrine, Florida. And I just love how, you know, there's still such kids, and yet there's something, there's kind of a romance going on. It seems like she's still a kid, she's sucking her thumb, but he's kind of entranced by her. It's an interesting mixture of things. And this teenage couple, also in Perrine, I love how he's looking at her, and the boombox is so 80s, and the way their shadows are entwined on the asphalt.
And just their postures, body positions, the way her leg is forward. I mean, it's really wonderful.
Yeah, those are great sandals that she's wearing. And she looks so demure. I feel like no one would look that way now. That the world, I don't know, teenage girls wouldn't look that way now. This was in Newburgh, New York, and I love the way these kids, they kind of look like old men to me, their expressions. They look, you know, weighed down by the world. And I feel like you could imagine these same expressions and gestures on much older people. So this was taken in the same place. I don't know if you remember that first picture I showed from American Scene that was two young men holding homing pigeons. This was taken in the same vacant lot, and those triple deckers in the background are the background that's in that other picture. And I'm thinking maybe that's probably why I didn't print this picture. I thought, well, I got one and I can't use this background twice or something, even though it's a very different photograph. Kids, you know, it's a totally different picture. But back then, I think I was very absolute about certain things. I can only get one from, you know, one picture from this particular place.
I'm glad you loosened up on that.
Yeah. And this is in Worcester, Massachusetts. Family hanging out on their porch. And a woman I found hanging out smoking on the sidewalk in Chelsea, Mass. I've always been kind of fascinated with these overpasses and what goes on under them and how they look in environments. This is in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, a couple that I found on their front porch. And this is in East Boston in 1981. I found these teenagers fooling around and, you know, just having a great time together. And I love the way you can look down the street, angle down the street. I like the dog, you know, there were still a lot of unleashed dogs running around in those days, very different from today. This is in Belle Glade, Florida, below Lake Okeechobee. And again, you wouldn't find these kids doing this today, I don't think. I mean, I think they'd be sitting looking at their phones or at their devices, and instead they've found a way to entertain themselves and have a good time. And they're still kind of in their private worlds. You feel like they're not really interacting. They found an activity, but they're kind of, you can see them looking inward. But it's
So I'm gonna bring forward a question from the chat. Pancho Sabri, do you find any differences being open to being photographed between white and non-white subjects? And maybe that's a question of then versus now as well. But at that
yeah,
time,
I think it would be harder now for sure, to be accepted and to have Black subjects say yes. Back then, you know, I'd say it was slightly easier with white people, but not so much. I didn't really notice much of a difference, honestly. I would say I got more no's from kind of middle to upper middle class white people than I did from anyone else. Just because, you know, those people tend to want their privacy more, or to feel that they have a right to it, I guess. When I put it that way, it makes me feel guilty, but yeah, that's true. So this is in Lake Worth, Florida, and I just love the way these kids were playing on the couch. The couch was falling apart. The stuffing from the couch is in their hair. It's chaotic. And then in the middle of it all, there's this beautiful young girl presenting herself to the camera in this amazing way. And just, it's sort of, you feel like it's such a gift when something like that happens when you're photographing. This is in Tallahassee, Florida. And I kind of like the adults, the liveliness of the adults and the liveliness of the kids, the two separate groups.
We have a question also from the audience about well, complimenting you how amazing that you remember so many details about each picture. But you had mentioned earlier that that you only had 8 pictures per roll, so you were kind of miserly with how often you were pressing the shutter. And the person is asking, do you think the limited nature of film photography brought out more meaning to your frames compared to this digital unlimited potential capability?
You know, probably a little bit, because I had gone from using a Leica and doing 35mm to using the Fujica and having only 8 shots on a roll. And I think having to slow down a little bit was helpful. It made me wait a little bit. So that was helpful. I never was sort of lured by view camera. On the other hand, I didn't want to do just, camera on tripod, 1 shot each. I like the portability of my setup. So it was kind of in between, an in between thing.
Yeah, Alex Sothis talked about that he likes using a view camera because by the time he's finally ready to take the picture, the subjects are finished posing, gotten tired of
I
posing.
think that's true. That's true. And of course, the view camera also has the advantage of, you're not holding it, looking through the camera at them. And so they tend not to, they're a little less aware of when you're going to take the picture, and you can just be face to face with them more, which definitely is an advantage.
And Jacques Banazra asks, what are the interactions between you and your subjects like before they become natural looking? Is there a period where it's very posy and awkward that you have to sort of live through before you get something ready to be photographed?
Sometimes, I mean, every situation's different, but sometimes people would pose a lot. But again, it was different. That's true today for sure. People are very self-conscious and like to strike a pose. But back then a little, maybe not so much. And I would always say, I want to photograph you just the way you are. So I was sort of saying, you don't have, sometimes I had to say to people, you don't have to look at the camera. I wasn't telling them not to, but just saying, giving them permission not to. So yeah, sometimes I did suffer. Although, people who are really rigid usually just end up not getting a picture. You take a few and you realize it's not going to work, and you
Right.
move on. So.
Yeah.
So this young woman, I saw, this was in Somerville, and I just loved how she's, this beautiful summer day, she's sunbathing, and yet, there's so much asphalt. She's in a neighborhood that backs up to this industrial park, and there's just something so strange about this scene. It sort of seems to contradict itself in a certain way.
Yeah,
This is Virginia.
there's a Martin Parr picture from Last Resort that has a similar feeling.
To this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which which picture, Chris? Do you remember?
Oh, I'll send it to you.
Okay, good.
It's a sunbathing picture like this.
Yeah. Another picture from West Virginia, from Amigo Hollow. And again, they look very natural. They're swimming in the river, passing the day. And yet there's also these two characters who are waving at the camera. And usually this is not a picture I would take, but there was something so kind of bizarre and funny about it. And, I'm being included in the picture, and yet at the same time, there's this kind of natural feeling about it. This is in Keyville, Kentucky. I don't remember. This might have been. I always found it very hard to do verticals with that wide angle lens. It would tend to show distortion a lot. It's possible at this point, this was in 1985, I may have gotten at this point the Fujica that had the 90mm lens on it, which was more like a normal, like a 40 or something. It's possible this was taken with a more normal lens. And this is in Mill Creek, West Virginia, at a park. I love the cigarettes, and I love how the girls are checking me out.
So we have about 3 people who are asking about your practice of getting permission before you take the picture, and can you speak more about why you personally have made that choice to ask permission before photographing people?
I just feel more comfortable with it. It's just when I started photographing, I certainly tried to do candids. I felt like it was very hard for me to get anything doing candids, because I would feel I couldn't be aggressive enough without asking permission to get close enough to people. And I always felt, I guess, that if I didn't ask permission, there was a certain violation that was going on. And it's funny, because I don't feel that from people who do take candid pictures. I don't feel that from their pictures. It's just something that, as a photographer, I got better results, I guess, with asking permission. In the end, that's really what it's about. And I felt like I could move in closer to people. I could collaborate with people. I could ask them to do things, or to, so there was something that enabled me in a way by asking permission.
Yeah. Well, and I think, as you say, it would be different for other people. I mean, somebody like Bruce Gilden, he's going to walk right up and shoot a flash off in your face and walk right on by you.
Right.
That
Right.
works for him, but it wouldn't work for me, and it wouldn't work for you, and it would not be taking advantage of your sort of superpower to actually connect with people and make a connection based on very short acquaintance. And I think as a photographer, but as a person generally, you adjust the way you do things to match your own strengths, and I think you have a real strength in being able to make a surprisingly deep connection in a surprisingly short period of time. So use that.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I kind of had a thing about these defunct, actually this one might not have been defunct, these drive-in movie theaters. Back then they were kind of dying, but they were still there, the big screens, the big outdoor screens. And so I was always trying to make pictures around them. And this is a young couple at dusk in, what was this? Pensacola, Florida. And I think that's the last picture, so we can totally open up to any questions. Or I also want to mention, Chris, isn't your show still up at 9 Gallery?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, Chris has a show that's at the same, it's at 9 Gallery, which is in the same building as Blue Sky right now, that's up through March 2nd. So for those of you in Portland, it would be, you can still have a chance to see it.
Yeah. And Tara Fondries, who's in the audience here, or was at the beginning of the talk, is also having a show up right now. That's a very beautiful show, and at Blue Sky. And sorry. And that's something that you get to see, and that's a very beautiful show, and in a way, kind of her show kind of contradicts your statement about how people aren't hanging out in the street without cell phones in their hands anymore, but If you go to the Ozarks, they are.
No, that's true. That's true. Yeah, no, her pictures are amazing. I didn't get to see them in the flesh, but the you know, I saw them online and they're really, really amazing and beautiful. And you know, it's interesting how I think it's hard to, you know, she mostly photographs her family and her neighbors. And I think it's hard to, she seems to both be in that world, but also out of it, being able to see it objectively and what's interesting about it. I think that's really hard to do. Anyway, any questions, please, maybe C, or who's gonna, of course, you're gonna tell me who has questions, right?
I have forwarded some of the questions on into our talking here.
Let's see, I'm
Yeah.
not seeing the chat. Maybe I need to open
We were,
something.
yeah, thanks, Chris. You did a great job of weaving in so many of the chat questions, and thanks everyone for putting in such great questions. There was one kind of near the beginning that was asking about your recent publication. So Sage, you just got this published, the newest book,
Yes.
Past Time. And Tyler Jones was wondering about your editing logic process and putting together this publication. And also thanks you so much for sharing with us today.
Oh, that's great. Well, I enjoy sequencing. I'm very old school. You know, I tend to put out work prints on my bed and floor and sequence that way. And and then usually at some point I order a blurb book to see if I think it works or not, because you know, it's funny how, you know, it looks good on the bed and floor, and then it comes back from blurb and you're like, what? No, that doesn't work at all. So let's start from scratch. But I think, you know, the first thing I did was I had some interiors that I'd taken of people, and I thought, you know, I was trying to cut down and try to, you know, I thought, well, what really do I want this book to be about? And I decided I wanted it to be about people hanging out, passing the time outside, and that it was easier just to take out those interiors. They felt different from the stuff I did outside. So that was one decision I made. And then I worked with Chris Pickler on it, and I of course had even more pictures that I sent him that I wanted to put in it. And he was like, you know, a lot of these are really jam full of things. I mean, I kind of like the simpler pictures. So I did take out quite a few of the, you know, some of the more packed pictures with lots of people and lots going on. Which maybe I wouldn't have done on my own, but I ended up liking how this looked. I felt like it was a good mixture of pictures of one or two people with, you know, and pictures of groups of people. So I guess you can say it was a collaborative process.
Yeah, and it's something that for since we have so many photographers in the audience, one of the things that I heard publishers say, more than one publisher, more than once, is that they're not so interested when someone comes and says, okay, I have a book project and it's all figured out and it should be exactly like this. Then it's not a collaboration. Then they're just saying, here, do my thing without any input from you. And that it, if you're going to launch into a book project, it's going to be a couple of years that the publisher and the photographer are working together, and publisher wants to feel involved. So I think your sort of openness to hear what Chris had to say as your publisher, I think is a reason that he wanted to work with you again. You know?
Yeah,
and I think that's
and the other thing is he wanted to do, he likes vertical books, and of course I take horizontal pictures, very horizontal pictures, and I was like, yeah, but if we make a horizontal book, we can make the pictures bigger. And he was like, yeah, but I really like how vertical books look. And so, you know, again, it was a compromise. I'm like, okay, but I really would like them to be at least 9 inches wide. And he was like, I think we can do that. So, you know, it was a back and forth, which, you know, as Chris points out, it usually is at best. So,
yeah.
And hopefully you end up with something that's better than what either of you would have come up with on your own, you know?
Yeah, that to me, that's the definition of collaboration, is you end up with a product that neither collaborator could have achieved on their own. It's something that's better than what you would have done on your own. And I think, you know, you've done a lot of books, but Chris has done more books than you have.
That's true.
to have, and for most people, they're, they've maybe done one book or no books or something. And to be able to tap into somebody who, when Chris is saying, a vertical book works better, that's not just some funny thing out of his head. He's done a couple of hundred books, so
Right.
he's got an experience base to draw from that most people don't.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true.
We have a question of what photographers from the past have influenced your work, or contemporaries, I'll add.
Oh, so many. I mean, I guess when I started out and when I was first doing this work, I had kind of grown up in the 70s looking at Diane Arbus and Lee Friedlander and Gary Winogrand. And I was fortunate enough to have Todd Papageorge as a teacher when I was a student at Harvard. And this was before he was at Yale. So I got him on the way to Yale. And so, this kind of documentary street photography was what was happening. And so I just kind of fell in love with it. And that's what I sort of settled into. And, later on, Joel Sternfeld, made me want to do tricolor. His American Prospects book. I just loved that book. So lots and lots of people.
Yeah. So we have a question from the audience. What is the genesis of your projects? And I was wondering, I saw that for American Scene that you had NEA grant, Guggenheim grant, another Massachusetts Foundation grant. Where did those fit in terms of the trajectory of the project? Had you already started the project and then went and got money to do it more, or were you like Robert Frank with the Americans, where he's got a Guggenheim saying, "Here's what I'm gonna do," and then actually
Well,
did it?
I had already started the project. I had worked on the project when at the point when I got a Guggenheim, and I already done this for about 4 or 5 years. So, NEA, I forget. I'd been doing it a few years. So it was sort of like starting it and then getting money to continue doing it. So.
And what was the genesis of American Scene?
Or Passing Time or American Scene.
Well, Passing Time, we know was that it had to do with going back because of
Going
COVID.
back and looking at it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess it was really just finding that I liked going out and photographing people outside on the street. And it's interesting because most of my books since have been much more subject based, like people who rescue animals, or my mother aging, things like that, where it's a much tighter concept. And I would say here it was a way of seeing, and it was people in their environments and a way of seeing people in their environments. And so it was a broader, I would find it too broad these days. I would find it hard to know what my subject was if I were doing it these days, I would say. But back then it seemed to me very clear what I was looking for. So I guess that's an unclear answer, but.
No, that's a good answer. Yeah. And given that your projects that have seen the light of day have all been very people oriented, we have a question saying, do you have a project that you're working on currently, which has a slightly surprising answer?
Yes, it does. Yeah. I've been the last few years, I've been working on photographing a pond in New Hampshire, and from a canoe. So it's no people at all. And it's really just the surface of the pond and what you see through the water, on top of the water, reflected in the water. It's very different. I guess what's somewhat unlandscapey about it is that I'm moving. I'm in a canoe and I'm paddling, and then I'm quickly putting down the paddle to grab something with my digital camera while I'm moving, and that stuff is moving. I'm moving, so it's landscape, but it's a moving landscape, I guess.
We have a question from Scott Brownell. Can you touch on your book Animals, or your two animals, the black and white and color, and how shooting that differed from others with animals involved.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, animals, I guess I photographed the black and white animals work in the early 90s. So it was after I had done this work. And I just, you know, photographing animals is extremely hard, but it's so much fun. And so it's like, I think I shot more for that project than any other project. I just, lots of rolls of film. There's a lot of near misses with animals where you really, you know, you're using a flash and they're moving and you're moving, and it's very, very difficult. But I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
So, I think that pretty much catches up the questions. If anybody else has a question, type now or forever hold your peace.
I think there were a few about asking about your influences and what photographers have influenced you and your work from the past. I'm also curious, kind of adding to that question, are there any contemporary photographers that you're really interested in, new work that's coming out today?
Yes, I would say lots of, I'm interested in lots of new work. I would be hard pressed to sort of say, pick a few names. But in terms of influences, I think I mentioned, that I was really looking at Diane Arbus. I was looking at Chauncey Hare, who did a book, Interior America, back in the 70s. I was looking at, Lee Friedlander, who did his Monuments book. Todd Papageorge was the one who sort of said to me, you should try this Fujica camera. I had been photographing with Leica, and he sort of pushed me to go to medium format. So many different influences. And I'm really interested too. What's happening today is that a lot of older photographers like me are publishing work from the past, and I really love seeing that work come out of, there's just a lot of it was very difficult in the 80s and 90s to publish work. I mean, part of that was that I think I wasn't persistent enough. And part of it was that more publishers, there were fewer photo book publishers, and the ones that were there wanted to do, 5,000 copies, 7,500 copies. And, most of us can't sell that many copies of a book. I mean, so the new thing of just 1,000 copies works much better. And it's great that there are these publishers that have come along who are doing all these photo books.
Thanks, Sage. We're getting close to the end, but there are a couple more questions getting in the chat. So if you're okay with answering a few more.
Sure, of course. Yep, definitely.
So Chris Solar's comment and question, because you pay special attention to the background of your images, do you have an opinion about the automobiles of today? Since to me, they are not as fascinating or romantic looking as vintage cars.
That's funny. I always found with a wide angle lens, automobiles are hard to photograph because they just kind of loom and they take over. And so I've always found it hard to include cars in my photographs. But yeah, there is that nostalgia thing where older cars always look better somehow. Cars of today, yeah, they all look the same, don't they? A lot of them. I mean, there's a few that stand out, but most of them look very similar to each other.
I remember there was a panel discussion. Elizabeth Leach had a group show of photography, and Randy Gregg, who had a photography degree, graduating, was the art critic at the time for the Oregonian, said, yeah, but the question is 50 years from now, who's going to care about looking at your pictures? And I thought to myself, 50 years from now, every picture is going to be more interesting. To see how things were 50 years ago is different from how they are right now. So So there's in another 50 years, those new cars that aren't so interesting to you now are going to be interesting to your children and grandchildren.
That's true. And the fashions too, what people wear and all that. Yeah, historical context, definitely adds to photographs. I mean, there are things that, I look at in these pictures from the 80s now that I value that back then I wouldn't even have thought twice about. It was just part of life then. And now, you see how many people were smoking, you see what people were wearing and what the fashions were and, all these short shorts and stuff. And that's added interest. So
There's another question. Jacques Benzara says, I have a tattoo of William Klein's Boy with a Gun. Question's a hard one, but do you have a favorite photo that you're drawn back to more than the others in the book? I don't get to often ask photographers that kind of a question.
Not really. It's hard to have favorites. It's hard to when you're asked to choose, you like, well, this one and this one and this one. So not really. I mean, I guess I love, an American Scene. I love the one of the guy leaning out the window with the pigeon, because it's one of the few pictures where I kind of got what I imagined beforehand. Usually you get something totally different. So there was something to be said about that, that was intriguing to me.
Right.
Any other questions?
I think we're good.
All right. So thank you guys so much for coming, and I really appreciate it. And Chris, this is available how? There were some people who asked me yesterday who couldn't come today, but wanted to know how to watch it later.
It'll be in about a week. It'll be posted on Blue Sky's YouTube page, along with a number of other talks, including Tara's talk, which I missed the opening, so I saw it on YouTube too, and it was great. So in about a week, they should be able to find it going to the Blue Sky YouTube page.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm gonna make an announcement through our socials and on the website, so folks know when it's been uploaded there. And then also, I just wanted to let folks know, if you're local and you're interested in checking out the book of the current exhibition, we do have copies here for sale. Sage, where can people buy your book if you're not able to get to Blue Sky?
You can buy it from Nazreli. You can buy it from, if you're in Europe, you can buy it from Setanta Books and Photo Bookstore. I think it's available on Amazon too, though I hate to mention that. And it's Photo Eye has copies of it too. So
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And for anyone who has questions or didn't get your questions totally answered, Sage, is there a way that people can get in touch with you, or do you want to stay quiet and stealthy?
No. You can through my website. You can email me via my website, and I'm glad to answer anything. And so yeah, please do get in touch.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sage. It's been such a wonderful conversation, and how fun to have Chris here to add to it. And thank you so much, Chris, for doing such a wonderful job. So it's been such a pleasure having you. And thank you so many people that came today. Such a wonderful to see the audience. And again, if you are able to check out the show, it is still up until March 2nd. So please do come by Blue Sky and see the pictures in person. And also, as mentioned, Tara Fondriest has her work up in the gallery at the same time, and both shows are fantastic. So we hope to see you all here. And if not, check out our website. You can see install pictures and yeah, find ways to connect with us in the future as well. We do a lot of these talks and in-person talks as well. If you have interest in membership or questions about Blue Sky, reach out to us. We're always available. So thanks again so much, Sage and Chris. This was so lovely. Yeah, I hope everyone
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, and thank you, Chris, very much. And thanks for the great show. So thanks for all of you coming. Bye.
Thanks, Sage.
Bye, everybody.